Welcome to MIMM's Halloween Special. Every day this week, a new collaboration will be posted featuring no sleep stories. Afterwards, I will be returning to my usual mix of true scary stories, original ones, and no sleep. But for now, I hope you enjoy this selection and the guest narrators. Joining me today is Tales from the Forbidden Blender. On his channel, you'll find original scary stories in blended genres. Link is in the description. Be sure to check him out and subscribe. Now, on to the stories, and have a happy Halloween.
Pretty Sure There Was Someone in the House That Night by davidgrayPhotography. 10 years on, and this still creeps me out. It's going to be long, because there's a few things that happened. Not sure if they were connected, but they were enough to make me write them down here. When I was in my early 20s, I moved out of home and in with my girlfriend. It was my first time out of home, and we decided to move to a town with 10 times the population of my tiny hometown. The area we had picked out was a nice, quiet area that backed onto a park, with a small strip of shops across from the park and not a whole lot of traffic, as it wasn't on the way to anywhere else. It was close to work, but also close to the local bars, so as we soon discovered, you'd be woken up at 3 a.m. by a group of people stumbling through the park to get home. But all in all, it was a good little area. We looked at a few rental houses online in that part of town and decided on one and did the walkthrough. It was a good price. Nice hardwood floors, 3 bedrooms, central heating, and most importantly, a large lounge room for gaming and sitting back and having some drinks with friends on the weekend. As we were wandering through, I looked at the doors and windows. The front and back doors were deadbolted, with the front door having a chain across it, and all the windows had locked when shut black plastic handles. You'd pull on the handle to slide the window left to right, and when you push the window back, the black handle would slide over a lip and into a groove along the metal frame, making a loud, hollow clung sound, so you knew the window was fully closed and locked. I took note of the windows and doors for a reason. As a kid, I was right into the usual stuff a kid is into. Aliens, UFOs, ghosts, all that good stuff. Often I'd go to bed and lay awake at night, imagining I'd heard a noise out in the hallway, or thinking I'd seen something peer around the very edge of the doorframe. The more logical part of my mind knew I was imagining it, so I'd just concentrate on the posters in my room and I'd be asleep soon after. But even to this day, I have a fear of someone getting into the house without me knowing. Anyway, we applied for the house, got approved, moved in, and spent our first night there on a cold July evening. And that's when the weird stuff started to happen. We hadn't assembled the bed frame yet, so we were going to sleep on the mattress on the floor. I had just wandered around the house, turning all the lights off. I was about to get into bed when I realized I hadn't checked the back door. I walked through the hall, into the kitchen, and to the back door. I hadn't locked either the screen door or the heavy wooden door, so I did so, giving both doors a vigorous twist, push, and pull to make sure they were actually locked. They were, so I closed the hallway sliding door, wandered down the hallway into the bedroom, closed the bedroom door, and got into bed. I was drifting off in that half-asleep, half-awake state when I was jolted awake by the sound of someone rattling the back doorknob. Not a quiet sound like someone testing it to see if it was open, but a good hard rattle, like when you lock yourself out and angrily shake the door, hoping against hope that it'll spring open. My girlfriend and I sat bolt upright. My heart was pounding and my voice shook as I muttered, "Fuck," to myself. We sat dead still, listening for sounds down the side of the house, or the same rattle at the front door. But nothing. After a good 15 minutes of listening, I laid back down and, staring at the blank wall where my posters would have been as a kid, I fell asleep. The next day I walked outside and looked around. The backyard was bare and it hadn't rained heavily in about a week, so there were no footprints or other signs that anyone had been there. Ordinarily, I would have dismissed it as a one-off thing. Some guy looking to steal some shit tried the door and slinked off to try the next house. But the doorknob had rattled, not the screen door handle. How do you manage that from the outside when the screen door was locked? About a week and a half after that, we were sitting in the lounge room, catching up on some TV I'd recorded earlier that week. We heard a noise outside, so I muted the TV and listened. It was the sound of perhaps half a dozen dogs barking, baying, and yipping about 2 blocks over. It wasn't your usual neighborhood dog barking session, where one sets off the others all around the area. It was all coming from the same direction, and it sounded like they were all right next to each other. They howled for about 10 seconds longer, then fell dead silent. Not a trailing off mix of gruffs and woofs, but as if someone had pointed the TV remote out the window and pressed mute. The silence was that sudden and absolute. My girlfriend and I looked at each other uneasily, but once again, I reasoned it away as some guy with a few dogs, maybe a trainer with a dog whistle, telling his mutts to shut up. We unmuted the TV and didn't hear them again that night. Later that night, around 10 p.m., there was a knock on the front door. I opened it as far as the chain would allow and looked out. There was a guy who looked to be only a few years older than me. He was wearing a baseball hat and dark green jumper, a pair of black track pants with 2 white stripes up the legs, and a goatee. His green eyes showed concern, but he had a slight smile that belied that concerned look. "How can I help you?" I asked with a friendly smile, looking the guy up and down, then looking over his shoulder to see if anyone else was with him. "Yeah, I just got out of a taxi at the shops and realized I left my kid's stuff in there. Can I use your phone to call the taxi?" he said in an unmistakable accent, leaning slightly to one side, his eyes darting past mine. Obviously, I felt uncomfortable with letting a guy I'd never met into my house to use the phone, so I lied to him. "Sorry, we just moved in and we don't have a phone yet," I said, leaning carefully to the same side, hoping he wouldn't see the phone sitting on the end table right next to the door. "I need to call a taxi." "Dave, can't I just use a phone?" he insisted. I didn't notice he had used my first name because I was trying to see who else was with him. I felt in my pocket and found a few dollar coins. "I can give you money for the payphone if you like. There's one out the front of the video shop," I said, withdrawing some coins, then jerking my thumb over my shoulder in the general direction of the strip of shops. The concerned look in his eyes slipped for a second, then came back. "Oh, no, it's okay. Never mind," he said, adding a hasty mumbled, "Thanks," as he walked off. I quickly locked the door again and checked the back door to make sure that was locked. Monday morning, I spoke to a coworker about the dogs. He lived a few blocks away on the opposite side of the barking. He heard the same thing too and figured, like us, that it was just some guy telling his dogs to be quiet. I didn't mention the taxi guy because I figured either he was actually trying to get his kid's stuff back, or he just wanted to wait until we opened the door, then charge on in. It was weird, but not dogs on mute weird. We had another week of peace until the Saturday that still has me wondering just what the fuck was going on. Once again, sitting on the couch, watching TV, this time with a few empty cans of Jack and Coke on the coffee table in front of me, and some empty Cruiser bottles in front of my girlfriend. Halfway through a recorded episode of Judge Judy, we heard the dogs again. Same direction. Sounded like half a dozen again. 15 total seconds of barking and yelping and baying, then absolute silence, like the mute button pressed mid-bark. By this point, I wondered if it was someone playing a CD of dogs barking, then hitting pause. Though the barking wasn't the same as last time. I unmuted the TV and went back to drinking. That night, we went to bed around 1 a.m., pretty tipsy. Laying in bed, watching the roof rock back and forth, I heard a noise down the hall and in the kitchen. It was the creak of the cupboard door next to the stove. It was the only door that creaked in that whole set of cabinets because it was the most frequently opened. I then heard something that damn near stopped my heart. "Hey, can I help you?" It was my voice. Not the hearing yourself on tape kind of voice, but the kind of voice you hear with your own ears whenever you talk kind of voice. My girlfriend obviously heard it too because she sat up and looked at me, wondering if it was me laying next to her. She saw it was and stared at me, really freaked out. I got up, threw on some pants, and grabbed a small vase used to hold a single fake flower off the dresser. I opened the bedroom door and flicked on the hallway light, shouting out, "Who's there?" at the same time. There was nothing. The vase raised above my head, I crept down the hall, slid open the hallway sliding door, then carefully walked into the kitchen, back against the wall. I flicked on the lights in the kitchen and looked around. You could see the entire kitchen from the entrance to the hallway, as it was square and all the appliances were built in or had a nook to put them in. There was nothing. I leaned from the hallway door through the kitchen doorway and looked into the lounge room. It was dark, except for the blue glow of the power button on my desktop computer. You could see the whole lounge room from there, as the two couches were positioned so you couldn't hide behind them. There was nothing. I flicked on the lounge room lights by the front door and then proceeded to look around the whole house. Front door was chained and deadbolted. The back door was deadbolted. The other bedroom doors were empty and the doors closed. All windows were definitely clunged shut and therefore locked. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but it scared the shit out of me. After checking everywhere a person could possibly hide, and after being totally convinced the house was empty and nobody had got in, I went back to bed. I don't know how, but I slept that night. I got up the next day and had a second look through and around the house. No signs of anything. Everything was still locked up tight. My mind instantly wandered to possible explanations, but it was getting more and more difficult to explain away what was happening. This time, I suggested to myself that we had both heard a sound, maybe a cat or something, because they can make some really odd noises. But there's no way you could mistake a cat howl for my voice. At this point, my girlfriend said she'd start coming to bed later to kind of keep an eye out and see if she could notice anything. I agreed, and we did this for a while. I'd stay up on weekends, so we were both up fairly late anyway. Things seemed to go all right, and I started sleeping better, knowing someone was guarding the house. Well, until the Saturday. About 2 weeks after the modified sleeping schedule, I woke up around 2 a.m. on a Saturday to see a light on from under the bedroom door. I got up, got dressed, grabbed the vase, and crept down the hall again. This time it was coming from the room my girlfriend worked from, and the door was partially closed. She wouldn't have left the lights on, because, well, that's something you'd notice when coming to bed. I tiptoed up and pushed the door gently open. I looked over at her computer desk and saw my girlfriend sitting there, working away on her computer. She turned around, saw me, and jumped, not expecting to see me up this late. "What's going on?" she asked, looking suddenly worried. "I thought you were asleep," I said, frowning a little. "No, I haven't been to bed yet. I've just been sitting here working on some stuff," she said. I turned and walked back to the bedroom. I flicked on the light. The bed was empty. I hadn't actually checked the bed to see if she was sleeping next to me. I just assumed she was when I woke up. I wandered back down the hall and told her. We had a good laugh, then I went back to bed. A week after this, we were sitting in the lounge room again. We'd walked across the park to the video store and rented Wayne's World and some other SNL skit that had no place being a movie DVD, and grabbed a fish and chips from the shop next door. Right around the product placement scene of Wayne's World, we heard it again. Those damn dogs. Mute the TV again. 15 total seconds of barking, then dead silence. Always a Saturday, always at night, always 15 seconds. I unmuted the TV and said to my girlfriend, "I think some guy has a motion alarm that plays dog barking sounds. Can't really explain it any other way." She nodded and mumbled her agreement through a gulp of Coke. We watched the other movie, played a few rounds of Mario Kart on the Wii, then called it a night. I fell asleep pretty much right away. Then, around 4 a.m., I woke up to a humming sound in the kitchen. Not a mechanical humming, but a more human kind of humming. It wasn't humming a tune, it was just humming a monotonous sound, as if someone had typed into a speech synthesis program. It was steadily getting louder. We both sat bolt upright again, listening to this steadily increasing hum, wondering what the fuck was going on. The sound got louder, until it sounded like it was right outside the door. We both stared in horror, thinking the door was going to spring open or something. The humming got louder and louder, but nothing had happened yet. I scrambled out of bed and grabbed for the vase again. I flung open the door and the sound stopped instantly. I was terrified. I frantically waved my hand around the door frame looking for the light switch. The light came on with a steady warm glow, and once again, the hallway was empty. I threw open the kitchen door, scared to see what was behind it, but even more scared to not open it. Nothing, once again. I stumbled around the house, opening cupboards and doors, muttering, "The fuck is going on here? The fuck is it? Fuck," to myself, while my girlfriend sat in the bedroom shaking and sobbing. I grabbed a stepladder, climbed onto the roof, and spent an hour up there, hoping I'd find a speaker or a faulty electrical cable or something. Just anything to explain what the hell had happened on each of those Saturday nights. There was nothing. Eventually I gave up and we fell asleep long after the sun had risen. That was the last time we heard the dogs, or any strange noises in the house. As soon as our lease was up, we moved out. I don't know what those sounds were, or if that guy who came to our door was part of it all, or what was going on with the dogs. But it was all just odd. We eventually moved back to my hometown into a nice little brick house. About 3 years ago, my girlfriend, now my wife, saw a person walk by her window. Which is impossible, because you can't get to that window without walking through a ton of overgrown bushes or going through a locked side door. But nothing's happened since. And now the whole house is fitted with a security camera outside, a security camera inside, and a bunch of door and window sensors, so we can catch any odd goings-on.
I'm not too ashamed to admit that the advancement of technology and our ever-increasing ease of access to it has made me a little lazy. I can't be the only one. So many of the things we used to need to put on pants for are now right at our fingertips. Want some groceries? Boom, Postmates or Instacart will hand-deliver anything you want from the store. Want some greasy fast food but don't want to wait in line while the person in front of you has to feed 300 people? Well, have someone from DoorDash or Grubhub go through that nonsense for you. Need to get somewhere, but your car is in the shop and public transportation is the absolute worst? Jump right into an Uber or a Lyft. For these, you might still want to consider throwing some pants on for. That is just scratching the surface. New ones are popping up nearly daily trying to find their niche in the market. Not to mention, you can just order almost anything that exists in this world from Amazon. It's only a matter of time before they figure out trans-dimensional gateways and can grab anything you want from any reality. So it was fairly easy for me to fall into this trap of spending a few extra dollars to give myself some convenience. I'm not rich by any means, but when it's 9 and I just don't feel like cooking or going out, I turn on my phone and can get virtually whatever I want to eat. Within this market, DoorDash is the trap I fell hardest into. It was never much more expensive than taking care of it myself, and other apps like Grubhub didn't offer as much variety. It'll be at least once a week that I'll watch that little car icon getting closer to my house, stomach rumbling in response. As much as I love the app though, I won't be using it anymore. Like I said, almost every week I order food, but 2 weeks ago I suffered a pretty serious injury during a car crash. One I'm still recovering from. So all these apps that before acted as a means of convenience became something of a necessity, as I couldn't drive or even leave the house. I, of course, wasn't ordering food every day. I wish that was the kind of money I had. When the pain was bad and I wasn't willing to cook, I didn't hesitate to order though. I had used the service enough to get embarrassingly familiar with some of the drivers. So I first noticed things were a little off when Martha, a woman I talk to often, popped up as my driver, which was no surprise. The surprise came when I was alerted that my food had arrived. I made my way through the house, slowly due to my injuries, and upon opening the door, it wasn't her. Instead, I peered into bright blue eyes that were shaded by an orange baseball cap. The man that stood in front of me lifted the bag of food and flashed a smile. Cautiously, I lifted my arm out and grabbed the plastic. Hearing the bag wrinkling during the transaction, I attempted to look beyond the broad delivery man. I could see Martha's car by the curb and her familiar silhouette in the passenger seat. The man noticed my nervous gaze and informed me she had injured her leg. He looked at the cast on mine and jested that I and she had that in common before wishing me a good day and walking away. I tried to wave at Martha, but assumed she might have fallen asleep when she didn't return the gesture. She was an older woman after all. Not much thought was put into it at the time, and any concerns I might have had were wafted away by the warm odor lifting off the bag. Pulling the plastic handles, my order gift was revealed to me. When I'm feeling down, nothing cheers me up more than a well-made steak and cheese. As the hefty sub was freed from its sleeve, I heard something fall to the floor. The sound was fairly distinct, and the picture in my senses matched perfectly with what laid on the carpet. A shining gold link bracelet. Leaning over, my fingers wrapped around the metal that was heated from the sub. With an open palm, I observed the jewelry to make sure it wasn't mine, but I didn't own anything like that. Quickly, I opened the app and contacted the customer service. They got back to me before I could get one bite in. What followed was a fairly brief conversation between me and the representative. My conclusion was that it belonged to Martha, and when she made sure all the food was there, it dropped off her wrist. The rep told me they would contact the driver and get back to me when we could take further steps. So I let that be that and went to eat my food. Nothing was wrong with it other than it being a little colder than it should have been. The place was only a few minutes away, but I was so hungry I barely noticed. The following 2 days, I managed, with the help of some pain pills, to make my dinners, but when the next day came around, I went on DoorDash once again, ordered some food from a local Chinese place, and saw that Martha was, once again, delivering my food. Customer service never got back to me, so I figured I would just return it then. When I swung my front door open to greet her, I was a little thrown off when I was met by the same man again. I tried not to show how taken aback I was, and instead pulled the bracelet from my pocket and held it out towards him. His face scrunched up as I explained that it must have fallen off Martha's wrist a few days ago. He stared at me for a moment, and I watched his mouth repeating the letter M before his eyes widened with realization. With a laugh, he replied that Martha wanted me to have the bracelet. As he spoke, I couldn't help but notice something poking out of the bag of food he was holding. It prompted me to assert that I would like to thank Martha for the gift. His glance shifted quickly from me to the car running by the curb. When his body twisted to look back, I noticed the car wasn't Martha's. Somehow, over the rumblings in my abdomen, I was able to feel my heart thudding against my chest. When his bright eyes locked onto mine again, he explained that he was just running DoorDash orders for her so she could keep making rent. It sounded plausible, but the longer the words sat with me, the stranger they became. Not so much what he said, but how it was said. Like someone who was having trouble remembering a movie script, so they just filled in the blanks. With my nerves sitting firmly on edge, I told him to thank her for me and quickly grabbed the food. My goodbyes were offered through an ever-shutting door, and only with the click of the lock did my heart begin to settle. Part of me was in overdrive attempting to convince myself that I was just overreacting. It got harder to do as I reached into the plastic bag covered in drops of condensation and wrapped my fingers around what had set me off. I had ordered from that place a few times, and I was pretty damn certain no orders DoorDash or otherwise had come with a rose before. My intention wasn't to hurt Martha's ability to make money, but I was getting nervous and contacted their support again. The person who responded to me acted just as confused as I was. They said they couldn't give me any specific or personal details, but Martha's account had some suspicious patterns. I'm sure the individual wasn't even supposed to say that much, but was instead just looking out for me. The person said they'd continue to look into it, and told me to contact them again if Martha ever became my driver again. After the second incident occurred, I had no intentions of ordering from DoorDash again. I talked to a few friends about the incident over the next few days, cooked food for myself even on the rough days, and waited, hoping their customer service would alleviate my nerves. When I calmed down almost a week after receiving the rose that was packed in with 2 servings of orange chicken, I fell getting out of the shower. Pain radiated intensely through my body. I went from scorching hot water to a blinding burn pulsing from my injured leg, and any thought of the dinner I was about to make was washed away. Nervously, I pressed through the list of restaurants and fast food joints on DoorDash, picking through any new addition to the lineup. I decided I would order something far away. Both orders before were pretty local, so I figured if I broke the pattern up, no problem. My food was ordered, a burger and fries from someplace I didn't even know existed, and I waited until a dasher confirmed my order. The screen flickered and I let out a sigh when I saw the name Marcus appear on the screen. All I had to do was wait and kick back with a handful of pain pills, and I would be chowing down in no time. I had nearly fallen asleep when my phone buzzed to alert me that my food had arrived. It was running early, something I saw as a blessing at the time. I hobbled over to the door, assisted by my crutches under my arms. Clumsily, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. Bright blue was all I saw, like my vision tunneled in on those piercing eyes. My hand moved to push the door closed, but it was hard to put any real force behind it in my state, and his hand easily stopped my attempt. He smiled and said that he was worried that he scared me, explaining that he was Martha's grandson. He went on to tell me that she had gotten sick and the hospital bills started piling up, so he started driving for her. Soon she had to stay home, and when he last delivered to me, customer service contacted him afterwards. They said he had to make his own account if he wanted to keep driving, because people are put off when the driver doesn't match. The words were smooth, like he sat outside my house and practiced them to sound more natural than last time. He went on to admit that he thought I was pretty, so he was nervous and the flower was just a silly misstep. Such a genuine smile was contorted by the words coming out of his mouth, and I let my guard be dropped. I returned his smile, and a laugh broke out between the two of us as I went over how ridiculous the whole thing was. When there was enough silence to do so, he took a look at the gleaming metal crutches and offered to set the food down inside for me. "No flowers this time," he joked, lifting the bag to my eye level. With a nod, I backed away from the door and allowed him to begin stepping inside. I'm not invincible against the nice smile and blue eyes, and I felt bad being so suspect of the guy. He asked where I wanted the food and I pointed to the kitchen counter. As he started walking towards it, I felt my pocket buzz and awkwardly reached around the crutches to get my phone. The walls of my living room felt like they were closing in on me when I read the text I had received from my friend. I had told her about the DoorDash incident, and it had made her curious, so she looked up Martha's name. She came across a recent news article with the name Martha in it. An elderly woman was found deceased in her car near a public park. But the article wasn't mainly about Martha. They were using her death to compare with another individual that was found dead just the day before. My hand nearly cracked the screen when I read the name of the recently deceased man. Marcus. "You okay?" The voice that was once smooth as butter, the voice that just a minute before had calmed me down, sounded like the devil himself. I didn't move my head, but my gaze shifted to the stranger standing in my living room. I thought it odd that he wouldn't have tried to put himself between me and the door, but once he saw my crutches, it must not have concerned him. With trembling lips and a bubbling ire, I commanded him to leave my house. He just laughed. Not like he did when we shared a laugh. This was something else entirely. "Come on, I just got here," he replied. His voice was so in control. I barely had time to register his intentions when I felt a sudden pressure on my face. There was no warning or wind-up, just his fist slamming hard against my nose and me falling against the door, shutting it. My body crumbled to the floor, legs so completely unable to support my weight. All I could do was look up at him. He had his hands over his face, and with shaking breath he pulled them down, stretching his features. "I'm so sorry. I've been waiting for this," he said, flashing that smile again, but I knew what was behind it then. It was warped. "Let's just eat our food and we can talk," he continued. Each word sounded like he was either going to start laughing or crying. I lifted my arm and pointed towards my bedroom, telling him that we can eat in there. His grin bore his fangs, and he walked over to me. When I thought he might drag me over, he instead grabbed my crutches and phone away from me. I had no intention to fight him on that. Living alone as I do, being a girl like I am, my dad taught me many things. Two of them stuck with me more than anything else. The first was that people can be horrible. Even though my body was weak and the man's assault had thrown me to the floor, it was nothing compared to what my old man would do to me. Watching the man turn his back to me, my food, means of mobility and cell phone in his hand, I remembered the second thing, something I never hoped I would need to know. Yes, my dad taught me people were horrible by being terrible. But he was a cop who had seen much worse people than him, and taught me, no matter how terrible a person is, they all get shot just the same. My fingers squeezed twice on the heavier than I remembered handgun. 2 hard cracks echoed around my home, and the man stopped in his tracks. Patches of dark red paint around the holes in his light orange sweater. Bastard didn't even turn to look at me, just stood for a moment and ended up dropping to the floor. It took me a minute before I was able to crawl over to my phone and ring the police. I wasn't worried about getting in trouble. They knew me pretty well. They were even happy to see me. After a car T-boned my cruiser and took me out of commission, I would get letters from the boys. My friends who had sent me the message that alerted me in the first place was the first to arrive on the scene. Then a few others got there, and it was pretty standard from there on out. Statements and questions. I was just happy I wasn't the one who needed to do all the paperwork on this one. Once the individual was identified, pieces started to connect. Martha's and Marcus's case got fast-tracked and solved shortly after. This leg is still giving me a hard time, but it's getting better. I can walk without the crutches and I'm back to driving. I think I'll be doing a bit more of that from now on, and I certainly don't see myself using DoorDash anytime soon. Be careful out there, folks, and enjoy your food.